Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, where we will be discussing the implications of China's recent carbon pledge. I'm Anke Schrader, the research director for the Asia region here at the Conference Board. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. As usual with all of our webcasts, we've left some time at the end for Q&A. Please ask your questions through the chat box on the lower left-hand side of the Adobe Connect session. You can download the slides. We will show via the download box on the bottom center of your screen. So if you want to refer to the slides later, you can do that. You can also share the recording of this webcast with your colleagues. It will be available 48 hours after the live broadcast. So with that, let's get started. I am delighted to have a great group of panelists with me today. We have with us Laurie Müller-Wirther, who is lead analyst at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
We also have with us Michael McComb, who is Vice President, Communications and Sustainability for SAP Greater China. Welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great to have you, Michael. And finally, last but not least, I'm joined by my colleague Minzi Xie, who runs our China research on sustainability and who is based with me at the China Center here in Beijing. Welcome, Minzi.
Hello, good afternoon.
I think it's probably fair to say that China's recent carbon neutrality announcement is one of the most hotly debated topics among sustainability experts in China right now. What we'd like to do today is take a closer look at where we currently stand. So, what does the reality really look like on the ground right now, especially in the COVID recovery context, where we need to go in China in order to fully decarbonize by 2060, and what the likely implications are for business. So Minji, let's get right into it. I know, because I've worked with you on this, so I know you've just completed a study that looks at how green China's infrastructure spending is post-COVID. Can you share some of the key findings with us?
Sure. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Minji Xie from the Conference Board, and I've been doing sustainability research for over 6 years with the Conference Board. And today I'm so glad to have the opportunity to share our research findings with you. To set the scenes of the theme of today, my session would focus to provide you a brief overview on China's long-term pledge and the current trend under COVID-19. In terms of the environmental perspective of sustainability in China. So I would like to start with China's long-term carbon pledge. During the 13th five-year plan period, and China has committed to reduce the carbon emission per GDP by 18%. And this effort paved China's way to the achievement of the 2030 carbon goal. So under the Paris Agreement, China committed to peak its carbon emissions before 2030, earlier if possible. And within China's intensified effort on anti-pollution and on energy efficiency in the recent years, China now is largely on track to achieve the goal of 2030. However, the 2060 goal is much more ambitious. On September 22nd this year, President Xi Jinping made a surprise announcement at the UN General Assembly. China will be carbon neutral by 2060. This goal is really ambitious, and based on the current scientific research, to achieve this goal, China will need to ramp up the policy support and investment in a massive scale, particularly in terms of the areas as outlined in the green boxes at the bottom in this slide. For example, increase renewables, phase out the fossil fuel, increase the energy efficiency, develop a more digitalized, flexible, or smart electricity network, and also to develop technology to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors, and also develop an effective carbon pricing mechanisms. So this 2060 goal could be a real game changer, which will require a major shift away from China's current energy path. So one of the key questions is that, are we starting to see the signs of the transformation from this moment? So next, I will move to the assessment of the current trend under the COVID-19. So in this year, we have conducted a research project which aims to answer one key research questions. In China's current economic stimulus plan, is China's government taking the environmental perspective into account? And how green is the current economic stimulus plan under COVID-19? And one important component of China's current overall recovery plan is the massive scale investment in infrastructure, which are financed through the issuance of the local government special purpose bond, SPBs in short. So we reviewed a total number of 1,345 SPBs issued in the first half of 2019 and also the first half of 2020. We collected the information and data of the projects invested by these SPBs, and then we identified the green project. So the green project here would refer to the project on environmental protection, on pollution control, on ecological restoration, etc. All those projects whose names or descriptions would have clearly implication of a purpose to have positive environmental impact. And based on our data analysis, we have got a few key findings. So the first key finding is about the share of the green project. So if you compare the first bar and the third bar in this chart, you will find that the share of the green investment increased from 5% in the first half of 2019 to 21% in the first half of 2020. This appears to be a good news at the first glance. However, if we take a deeper look, we find that this significant increase is driven by one important factor. That is the impact from the public housing redevelopment project. The public housing redevelopment project accounted for the majority of the SPB's investment in the 2019, and there is no any green project under this category. And furthermore, this category can no longer be financed through the SPB's investment since 2020, according to the most updated regulations. As a result, there is a surge of SPB's investment flowing into the other categories. So if we take the public housing redevelopment project out of the equation, we find that the share of the green investment remains roughly the same. As you can see here in this chart, the second bar and the third bar, from 22% in 2019 to 21% in 2020. So if we exclude the abnormal impact from the public housing redevelopment programs, the share of the green project does not appear to be rising. Here we come to the second key findings. The second key finding is about the share of the green projects of each categories under the SPBs. So based on the government definition, there are 8 major categories of SPB investment. And we find that except for the projects in the environmental protection and natural resource management, very few investment can be clearly defined, categorized as green. As you can see in this chart, most categories have a very low or small share of green project. And in particular, the category of industry park has the most significant decrease in terms of the share of green investment. As for the third key findings, the third key finding is about the share of the SPB's investment into the category of environmental protection. And this category will cover the project on the pollution control and treatment infrastructure. For example, the wastewater treatment infrastructure or the solid waste recycling infrastructure. So we find that in total, the share of the SPB's investment allocated to the environmental protection has decreased from 16% to 10%. So this is a significant decrease. Instead, there is a much larger share of SPB investment flowing into the category of industrial park and social infrastructure. So in summary, putting these three key findings together, we will find that comparing the investment, the SPB investment in the first half of 2019 and the first half of 2020, first, the share of green project remains roughly the same. And second, within the categories, there are green projects. We don't observe any shift moving towards green. And third, the share of SPB investment into the category of environmental protection has decreased significantly. So we will arrive to a conclusion that, on the one hand, China has not backtracked on the green investment. However, on the other hand, China has not moved forward noticeably, neither. So there is no indication of China's current economic stimulus plan favors the green infrastructure. So here we come to our final conclusion. If we compare the long-term and the short-term trend, we find that China's 2016 carbon pledge is not in alignment with the how the current infrastructure stimulus has been allocated to date. And if the SPB's investment goes ahead as planned, they will further lock in the carbon in the carbon-intensive sector. So it seems that, at least in the short term, it's hard to reconcile China's 2016 carbon pledge with the current non-green infrastructure spending activity. So I think I will stop here and hand over the session back to Anka.
Thanks, Minji. I mean, so you've just said basically we're not really moving forward. We're also not really backtracking, right? So we're sort of in a status quo situation here based on the special purpose bond analysis. So given what you just described and based on past experience, I know you've studied extensively, the anti-pollution campaigns, for example, over the last couple of years. So given that, what do you think are some of the near-term implications for local business environments?
Okay, thank you, Anka. I think this is a very important question. I guess I would answer this question from two perspectives. One is from the investment perspective, and the other is on the regulatory perspective. As I mentioned earlier, based on our research on the SPBs, our research indicates that China's government is currently under great pressure of economic growth, and every effort is being made to cushion the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19. So this would give rise to the more investment to support those carbon-intensive sector for the years to come. And this is the implication from the investment side. However, from the regulatory side, China's government also highly highlighted its determination to maintain or even strengthen the current environmental protection commitment or target they have set. And I think that the overall trend towards a more stricter pollution control or pollution prevention standards will still persist in the near term. And also for the coming 14 5 years plan, we will still expect a larger possibility of a more aggressive set of targets on emission and also on energy efficiency. So from this point of view, companies who are particularly in the emission-intensive industry should proactively prepare for this strengthening oversight from the government.
Thank you, Minji. Laurie, let me turn to you. As Minji just said, there's clearly a disconnect right now between the short-term spending and the long-term messaging here. Given this, what do you think will be the near-term outlook for China's energy and environmental policy? And then, tagging on to that, what is the long-term outlook? What will it really take for China to decisively shift towards decarbonization?
Thank you, Anke. I'll just say that Minji's findings very much reflect what we've seen as well. We mapped, for example, the investment plans of the 8 key provinces for energy production and consumption, and found that the investment in fossil fuels still exceeded the investment in clean energy by a factor of 3, and exactly
right.
the same pattern that when stimulus and state-driven capital spending has been ramped up this year to counter the economic effects of COVID-19. It's not that the spending is dirtier than before, but it's also not that it's cleaner than before. It's flowing through the same plumbing, so to speak, through the same structures, and that's why much of it is unfortunately still flowing into fossil fuels.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the longer term picture here. I know you're doing a lot of work on this. Walk us through sort of the more details around the carbon neutrality target and what you see sort of as the key challenges and the steps that China needs to take.
Absolutely. So starting from the long term, I'll then zero in on the next 5 and 10 years. So 2060 sounds very far away when you think about it in your daily life. We're not actively thinking about 2060 a lot, I think. But if you think about this from an energy systems perspective, it's actually quite near. The pledge to reach carbon neutrality by 2060 was based on a big study by the Tsinghua Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development under Professor He Jianquan. And that study, looking at how they projected that target would be met, they said that the power sector will have to get to 0 emissions by 2050, which is already quite a bit closer. That's within the conventionally assumed lifetime of power plants built now and so on. The key solution for China to get there, if you put it in one sentence, is electrify everything and make electricity clean. So we're talking about upwards of 80% of all energy consumption, heating, transport, industry, and so on, shifting to using electricity and producing the massive amounts of clean energy needed to fulfill all of that needs. They're projecting that energy demand will peak in early 2030s, which entails a massive shift in the economic model of China, which has so far relied very heavily on scaling up construction, infrastructure, stimulus, and the construction material industry to supply that. And that's, of course, good news for anyone on the consumer or services side of the economy, because currently that massive investment spending is diverting resources from households and consumption to the state sector and to investment spending. On the other hand, looking at the investment needs, we're talking about upwards of 1 trillion, 100 billion yuan, so 100 trillion yuan, sorry. So about $17 trillion spent on the electricity sector to build all of that clean energy that I talked about, and in addition to that, a significant investment in things like carbon capture and negative emissions. And so just thinking about how this announcement changed the outlook for China's energy. The key concern that I had, and I think most people who are thinking about the development of global emissions had, was that China already had the target of peaking carbon dioxide emissions around 2030, but there was no clarity on what was going to happen after. And now this target means that there's going to have to be rapid emission reductions afterwards. The other really key implication is the need to scale up investment in clean energy, especially wind and solar power. Now, the previous assumption was that that market was going to be kept roughly stable at the current scale that is already large, but just keeping that scale. There's a clear implication for natural gas, which if you're aiming for 50% emission reductions or 80%, you can make the argument that gas has a potentially significant role to play. But when you're aiming for 100%, that role is much more limited and much more a transition role. And one of the key questions right now is what happens to coal-fired power. The industry has still been expecting 200 or 300 new coal-fired power plants by 2030. And given the fact that you will need an almost complete coal-power phase-out by 2050, making all of that new investment would be enormously wasteful and would make the transition a lot more complicated. Highlighting the implications for clean energy investment, we're talking about the combined wind, solar, and nuclear capacity increasing about tenfold by 2050, and the annual installations, the annual investments more than doubling, roughly doubling or tripling, depending on the scenario that you look at for wind and solar, especially. Then talking about the near term and the challenges, as Minji and Anke alluded to, there has been increase in emissions. There has been increase in coal consumption in the past years. We just have a new study out today highlighting how the steel industry has still expanded massively in the past years in China, and so on. And I would argue that, of course, General Secretary Xi is completely aware of this trend. So his announcement of the 2060 goal was made in the context of these developments that are definitely negative from a climate perspective, and are a signal domestically to start shifting things around. But it still means that there's a very dramatic shift that needs to be achieved. As Minji's presentation showed, there's still ongoing investment in fossil fuel infrastructure that is making the transition more complicated, and there is a very high reliance on these very high levels of investment to drive GDP growth. So making a shift to investing in clean energy will be the key challenge for the next 5 years. And right now, there's a bit of a mismatch between the targets up to 2030 and the long-term target. So the current assumption is that things will change very slowly up to 2030, and after that accelerate very fast. That's partially because China doesn't want to give away the possible strengthening of 2030 targets before climate negotiations even seriously start. But that's also partially because there's skepticism about how fast you can turn things around. But that just leaves a very big task for the following 2 decades. So that mismatch is something that will need to be addressed in the next 5-year plan. And that's going to be my last point, that right now, obviously, the 14th 5-year plan is being finalized, and the targets that are set will really set the pace and articulate the short-term implications of the 2060 target. From what I'm hearing, the planning for the energy sector and the power sector will be delayed a bit to give the institutes working on that time to digest and translate the implications of the 2060 target into those plans, which is good news. And because, as I highlighted, the expectations that people had for this decade before the 2060 announcement were not very progressive in terms of shifting to clean energy. I've put out a list of targets to watch out for, and that will give you an indication of how ambitious the government is about implementing this pledge in the next 5 years. I'm happy to speak more to that. One key implication for pretty much everyone doing business in China is that it seems quite clear that there's going to be a 2030 CO2 peaking action plan under the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, similar to the air quality action plan and water and soil action plans of the past 7 years. And those plans have been very influential and given the Environmental Ministry a very strong mandate to inspect and enforce and set short-term targets. There's going to be requirements for certain cities and key regions to peak their emissions earlier. There might be similar requirements for key industries. And this is a very bureaucratic thing, but anyone who knows the Chinese regulatory system understands that this is very significant. Climate action is going to be included into the system of environmental disciplinary inspections. And so if there's one thing that gets the attention of any bureaucrat or any business person in China, that's the Central Committee for Disciplinary Inspections. So that is really going to be the key tool for implementing these targets once they're set out. Another process to watch out for, the Central Committee of the Communist Party said that there's going to be, or there should be a steady decline in CO2 emissions by 2035, which probably foreshadows having a midterm target and a midterm climate plan for 2035, which is, of course, an important year for the party and the country. So that's my overview.
Thanks, Laurie. Really interesting. I mean, I think, let me ask you something. All things considered here, what are the key signs really that you need to watch out for to get a better sense at what point China is really going to step up its decarbonization efforts? I think you you already said that the coal sector is crucial in this regard, right? If it's going to be phased out by 2050, we're already looking, we're looking at the lifespan of power plants on average in China. We'll pretty much have to stop, building new power plants right now. It's just roughly a 30 years lifespan, I think. So I guess this would be one key goalpost to see what will happen with coal over the next couple of years, really. What other key markers would you say people have to watch for?
Thank you. I think there's really two. One of them is the targets for clean energy and for coal, whether we see that acceleration, roughly doubling the targeted rate of adding clean energy and so on. That will, of course, then also push out coal and fossil fuels from the energy system already. The other one is whether the key state-owned enterprises get a clear signal that they have to diversify away from fossil fuels. So it's clear that the government doesn't want the state-owned sector to decline in importance, doesn't want it to shed a very large amount of jobs and so on. So then getting those state-owned giants to have a transition strategy to diversify, to shift their investments away from fossil fuels will be crucial for this transition to be actually viable. And recently, a lot of state-owned enterprises like CNOOC, Sinopec, Baowu Steel, and so on have announced that they will study the 2060 goal, or they will come up with a plan for CO2 peaking or similar things. So they are looking into this, but the short-term goalposts for 2025, 2030 are still quite unclear. So that level of ambition will also dictate how serious they are. And I'll just highlight, we released a new piece of research today looking at the steel sector and showed how it completely missed the targets of cutting capacity by 2020.
Right.
And this was under a signature Xi Jinping initiative of supply side structural reforms. So having Xi's name attached to something doesn't necessarily mean that everything will be smooth sailing. It will really take that strong implementation, a strong mandate for the MEE to go after companies that skirt targets and regulations, and for the NDRC, the state planning agency, to set strong targets for the 5-year plan and so on.
Right. I mean, let's hear what the audience has to say. We have a quick poll here. Maybe we can open the poll, so you can just if you see a pop-up, you can just select your answer option, and then we'll be able to look at this at the results in real time. So when do you think China will realistically be able to peak carbon emissions? Will it be before 2025, which would obviously be very ambitious? Will it be by 2025, before 2030, or after 2030? Let's give it a couple of seconds here to see how people are responding. All right, I think let's say, yeah, why don't we share the results with the broader group? So that's yeah. So let me just read this out here quickly. It's interesting. So we see actually we have a fair share of optimists here who are saying that China will peak by 2025, which would be 5 years from now. Then we have a third that thinks it's before 2030, which would be aligned with the current announcement that the government made in late September. And then we have the largest share of people who really think still are very skeptical, I guess, and say it will still happen after 2030. So that's interesting. Laurie, do you have a response to that? Is that sort of in line with what you are hearing through the grapevine with other people?
I think I wish I didn't kind of inject more pessimism with my last remarks. I think Xi Jinping had a very clear reason for making the announcement, and my sense is certainly that it is being taken seriously in China. And usually when things are set in motion, like the air pollution action plan in 2013 and so on, goals are met faster than they're targeted. So most of the progress towards the 2017 targets for air quality were already achieved by 2015, and the 2020 targets were achieved by 2017 and so on. So I think there is a lot of inertia to get these things moving, but once they do start to move, then it becomes a bit of a competition between different localities and so on. And that's the key dynamic that the environmental ministry is now trying to create with the action plan and with designating different cities and so on to move early, to create that dynamic of competition. So it's not a guarantee, but at least keep an eye out for things starting to move a lot faster than it feels right now. That's certainly what happened with air pollution.
I mean, let's turn to the business side of things here. I think that what most companies are pondering is how business practice will really be impacted by all of this, and what sort of strategic adjustments need to be made, and when they will have to be made, right? And Michael, I mean, I was really delighted. I asked you to join us, and I was really delighted when you were able to do that, because I think SAP's product portfolio really provides a very unique lens into this, into what climate actions companies across the board will have to consider going forward. Can you share with us which trends you are seeing based on the services SAP is offering in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Anka. It is great to join you and talk about this, and I think you could see that there was a bit of optimism in the poll there about China's pledge, and a lot of excitement, and certainly I share in that excitement. And I think when you look at this period, the announcement was made just in September, so it's an interesting time. We're several months into a global pandemic, and we saw COVID create a pretty significant drop in global emissions, but also emissions out of China. And I think that I think it's something like 200 million tons of CO2 was reduced because of COVID, and that's massive. That's something like 10% of the global emissions because of that, and that's I think that's just an indication of how important this 2060 pledge and ambition is, because of the scale of emissions in China. Right? This whole announcement was huge, because it's the first time that China, is the world's biggest emitter, something like 28-30% of global emissions, has pledged to end and hit net contribution, zero net contribution of global emissions. And I think it's wonderful to see President Xi, making such a very clear. He made this pledge, and certainly we're all going to have to, and as Laurie and Minji very articulately indicated, we're all going to have to kind of look at what are the implications of this. When you look at China's pledge, it's 10 years behind the pledge of many other countries, right? A lot of them are kind of saying 2050, 2060 is 10 years behind that. One of the interesting perspectives that you could look at is, where are we on that historical comparison? When you look at not just as a net annual target of 2060, but in terms of where China's development has been, you look at the period between a lot of Western countries and where they hit peak emissions to where they'll hit net zero to where China will hit peak emissions and where they're going to hit net zero, it's much shorter. Average in the Western countries, it's like 50 years, and what China is pledging to do is hit peak emissions in 2030 and then net zero in 2060. So it's 30 years. So I think that just demonstrates the country's commitment, but it also demonstrates that there's a lot of work to do, and especially a lot of work to do by business. And I think when you look at the sector things, I mean, Lori made a very clear case for that. I think, you know, businesses across sectors are going to have to look at what their strategies are. And certainly when you look at the energy mix change, and the big state-owned energy producers, but also the energy users are going to have to look at their own particular use cases. But the energy mix change between now and 2060 is going to be massive, right? The change in the next 40 years in terms of the mix change is probably as significant as the net volume of energy generation has been over the last 40 years of China's rise. And as Lori said, you know, the coal industry and the energy generation going from, what is it, like around 65% today. The big issue, as you pointed out, Lori, was, you know, how are we going to quickly move to making that 65% less than 10% by 2050, 2055, when in fact there was as many coal permit permissions, new coal-fired plant permissions granted in the first half of this year as there was in all of 2018 and 2019. So this is an issue, right? So that we're going to have to look at much more policy coordination on this, and certainly phasing out some of the older coal plants is going to be an important part of that. But China, as you know, is already a world leader in renewable energy sources like wind and solar and hydro. And all those are going to have to continually grow, especially as the storage technology grows. And to provide that stability in the grid, nuclear is going to certainly play a big role, especially inland. But I think, you know, when it comes to business implications, manufacturing, that whole sector is going to be super, super important, especially when you're thinking about some of the other policy directives around the structure of the Chinese economy and its focus on self-reliance and export trade and manufacturing, as well as stimulating that internal domestic consumption economy. So we're going to move from, you know, kind of a quality, we're going to move up the quality production spectrum. And what that means is a significant amount of manufacturing efficiency increases. So you've got, you know, manufacturing plants and facilities are going to get a massive upgrade, right, to be much more efficient, which will lead to overall greater environmental performance and lower emissions. As Lori said, again, the transport sector is going to be huge, especially from the industrial and commercial side of things, not just the private transport, which is also going to be significant when it comes to a policy perspective. You've got you know, really amazing ambitions coming out of countries like the UK and in the US, California, which is a massive economy on its own, making commitments to be to not have any new petrol-powered car sales after 2030 or 2035. So China's going to have to really up their ambitions. I think that they're looking at 2035, but still having some new fuel-based vehicles on the road. So these are the kinds of things we're going to have to look at as a transport industry. Minji pointed out a lot of great information around the financial area. That carbon neutral target is going to take a lot of regulatory oversight, especially in the financial services area. We've got, so from a corporate perspective, financial disclosures is going to be an area where we're going to have to see some pretty significant improvements, especially when it comes to information following some global standards, and whether they're the Chinese version of global standards or the global standards, things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, these kinds of things are going to have to be much more incorporated into how companies develop and disclose their performance. And of course, when it comes to taking advantage, and I think hopefully we'll see if the conference board conducts a repeat of that in research middle of 2021, we'll hopefully see some significant improvements, but China's financial institutions are going to have to go big on product innovation, like green credit, green bonds, ESG investment funds, and so forth, to really push that forward. And when it comes to business specifically, to accelerate some of this carbon reduction ambition, a significant portion of the energy and emissions that are generated by business are in manufacturing and transport and logistics. So, as China restructures and moves towards that dual circulation economy, we're going to have to really better understand what are the ways and what are the levers, what are the processes that business can take up to effectively reduce their emissions. And one of the things that we're looking at is some of the challenges that business are facing. So SAP, we supply a lot of the enterprise software, enterprise application software that helps companies run more efficiently. And so we're looking at the macro perspective at what our customers are, what are the challenges that they're facing, and especially when it comes to climate risk. And you've got market risks, you've got regulatory risk. So you got both B2B, B2C customers demanding products and services that are much more environmentally friendly. You got employee activism, being much more vocal and choosing who they work for. And these are the kinds of talent issues that if you're not necessarily moving forward and communicating a proper environmentally and responsible climate strategy, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And certainly, as Minji pointed out, we've got a lot of government regulations coming into this area, and the financial insurers are quickly looking at restructuring their asset and risk models to take into account climate risk. So these are the kinds of things that our customers are dealing with. But when it comes to climate action and reducing their net emissions, what they're finding really structurally challenging is that they still cannot find it very easy to measure and account for their carbon emissions up all the way through their supply and value chains. Right? There's big data gaps, lack of transparency, all the way through the procurement, the production, and delivery stages. So I think one of the questions, Anka, that you might ask is, why SAP and what are we doing? Right. So,
right.
As I said, SAP is Europe's largest technology company. We provide enterprise application software. Our business is really the business of business. We like to make this statement, which I think is quite impressive, right? That 77% of the world's transaction revenue somewhere somehow touches an SAP system. So we really do enable global commerce. And with 400,000 global customers, I think the interesting thing when it comes to climate action is that we've got 85% of the largest carbon emission intensive companies using our software. So we have this really amazing opportunity to work with them closely to help them reduce their negative impacts and begin transitioning to a low carbon and ultimately a regenerative economy. And the way that we do that is by helping them better understand and apply digital technologies, which are going to help save huge amounts of carbon emissions in industries like utilities, agriculture, and transport, just to name some of the bigger ones. And we feel like if we can look at some of these things and apply some of these technology solutions, it's very clear that we can make significant impacts. I mean, our CEO has come out recently and made very bold statements that SAP is going to take a leadership role in this area, and we want to make sustainability profitable, and that will make profitability sustainable. And I think that kind of moves to the philosophy that I think we're adopting, and we're hoping that our business customers adopt, is that we can't look at this as a nice to do anymore. We have to make this part of our business strategy. So we launched a program this year, which we called Climate 21. This is the first time in many years that SAP has been very clearly in a focused development area, developing sustainability focused software solutions for our customers. This Climate 21 will have a number of products underneath it that help companies understand, minimize, and disclose their carbon footprints, of all of their products and services. And the first product under this umbrella it's got a big name, but it makes sense. It describes what it does. It's called the Product Carbon Footprint Analytics Solution. And what it does is it just helps analyze the carbon footprint of your products down to the product level. And I think this is an important one, because when it's going to help business customers account for their total emissions, of course, but it gives them this kind of granular and detailed understanding, and they can apply. If you've taken an accounting course, then you can apply cost accounting principles down of your CO2 equivalents down to the individual product. So, if you have supply chains bringing in materials, and then you have your manufacturing, you can then apply down to the individual product what that carbon footprint is. And I think this is important because of course, at the enterprise level, you want to understand what your impacts are and what your costs are. But then at the product level, you want to be able to piece that out and use that cost accounting principle application, and then communicate that to your customers so that they can make more responsible purchasing decisions. I think the other interesting part of this, in the way that Carbon 21 program at SAP is looking at it, is it's going to very easily and elegantly kind of cover off the upstream and the manufacturing, the scope 2 and the scope 1 in the first instance, right? And I think this is important because it's going to be providing much more valid and accurate data and kind of plugging those gaps I talked about. But I think in the years ahead, in future iterations, and again, as we get into software development and the ability to bring in other data sources, perhaps with the advent of things like IoT technology, 5G, and as these technologies and infrastructures mature, we're going to have the ability to have much greater insights down into scope 3 as well. So really covering the entire range there. But beyond the impacts that the companies have themselves, the product carbon footprint measurements can gather in all of that, the supplier data. So and you're seeing a great deal more suppliers, extraction businesses, and so forth, really getting down and understanding what their emissions and intensities are, and being able to disclose that down through the supply chain. And so as that kind of ecosystem grows, we'll be able to incorporate that data into our customer companies. And that can, of course, have a great deal of trust built into the system, a lot of security, privacy built into through applications and technologies like blockchain and so forth. Right. So, kind of to finish up on this, I think the Carbon 21 approach and the new PCFA solution is going to be available next year, and it's going to be one way in which we see companies being able to to be able to account for, have that greater transparency, the validity of data. But what I think is going to be, the most important thing is that we can start to model and take that data, and we can run scenario analyses on different things. So if I want to look at where my products are being sourced, or the manufacturing techniques and so forth, or different components or materials being used, I can model different scenarios and really lower and optimize the carbon emissions. And that's, to me, that's the first thing that it's a great step. It's a great lever that companies can use. And it's this kind of enhanced functionality and the transparency about carbon footprint down to the individual product level that's going to help kind of lay the foundation to minimize the business and industrial carbon footprints.
Thank you, Michael. This is really interesting. I personally think it's really exciting to see. One of my first, while I was listening to this, one of my first thinking was, there's a lot of complexity in this, obviously, and it's just getting more and more complex, right? There's also a lot of urgency here. So would you think it's fair to say that for businesses, really now is the time that you really need to, if you're doing planning for the next couple of years, if you are working on a sustainability strategy, it's just become a must to have this as an essential part of your business strategy. And I know you pointed out earlier, it's not a nice to have anymore, right? It really must be a core part of your business strategy going forward and able to be sustainable in the long term as a business. Would you think that's a fair statement?
Absolutely fair. I would go so far as to say that most CEOs, I think, are starting to realize that climate change is a significant risk to most industries, most geographies, right? So if you look at global temperatures rising and the resulting impact on environmental issues, but also on social issues, the risk of that business and the status quo response just is not going to get us to where we need to go, and it's going to pose potentially catastrophic impacts to the sustainability of their own businesses. And so then the next question is, well, what is my strategic response, and how much is it going to cost? How can I effectively incorporate that into my core business strategy? These are all, significantly important questions. Technology, of course, has a role. Business processes will play a role. And I think one of the lenses that you could use is to say, well, how are we measuring? Business loves to measure things and make sure that we're making good progress. And one of the lenses that a lot of people are using is the UN SDGs, right? So if you could say, well, how am I tracking against the SDGs? Well, right now we're not tracking too well. I think a lot of them, latest I heard was, if we kept going on this pace, we won't achieve the SDGs till about 2080, right? And I think COVID even pushed that back by 10 years or so. And so we need to really look at that and accept the fact that we're going to have to accelerate things. There is a massive sense of urgency. Time is of the essence. And business has the scale and if we can start to learn how to use our core capacities of creating networks of networks and collaborate more effectively, and again, incorporate that into core business strategies, we can certainly accelerate the pace of change. And the funding gap is another one. We're $2-3 trillion annually short of achieving some of these global goals. But you could say corporates making big proclamations around being carbon neutral. I think that's becoming table stakes, certainly for large multinationals. We've had a carbon neutral target by 2025. We're well on the way to do that, and we have a very specific plan, steps to achieve that. But I think one of the things that I'm impressed by and I'm intrigued by and inspired by is that when companies can say, well, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do one better. And I like that some of these proclamations by companies and countries have almost created kind of a race for achievement, and that
race to the top.
Yeah, I mean it's good to see. So I think when we can say, well, I'm going to be carbon neutral by 2025. I'd like to see what can we do that's even better than that, even more ambitious than that, and how can we do more and become actually generative to societies and to the environment, right?
Yeah. I actually think that's a very nice closing statement, and I definitely think that kind of thinking will be needed in China over the next couple of years, because things will most definitely accelerate. As Laurie also said earlier, we're gonna sort of, maybe not immediately, but there will be a point in time where things will have to accelerate massively in order to achieve this goal. I think we're probably at the end of our webcast. It was a really good discussion. I noticed that Laurie answered a couple of questions in the chat. I know we didn't have a time for Q&A here right now, but you're very welcome to send us any questions you have. You can send the messages directly to the panelists or to us. We're happy to answer them via email. So I think that's a wrap for today. Michael, Laurie, Minji, thank you so much for sharing your views with us. Last but not least, we'd like to hear your feedback.